The war between traditional and modernist architects flared up again this week after Paul Finch, chairman of the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, praised the fact that modernists had prevailed in bids to create Olympic buildings. Robert Adam, a member of the Traditional Architecture Group, and Michael Taylor, a senior partner of Hopkins Architects, the firm that has finished the Olympic velodrome, met to discuss architecture, Marcus Vitruvius, and half timbering, with Lanre Bakare in the middle. The prejudice towards traditionalists is rather like sexism. It's just in the culture. If you're in the profession, that's just what you do. When you're delivering the prejudice, you don't really notice it. But if you're on the receiving end of it, then it's a problem. Underlying that is the slightly strange notion that only one style or approach should prevail. That goes way back. You hear stories about people who supported Le Corbusier fighting with people who supported Mies van der Rohe. Some people are so passionate about what they do, they cannot separate their personal preference from what is good. I've known students who were not let onto courses because they've worked for me, or who are told they'll fail a course if they carry on with a traditional style. To get through an architectural college pursuing traditionalism is extremely unlikely. It's particularly odd when there's a shortlist for a competition, something like an Oxbridge College, and you have a list which encompasses a range of styles, and you think, are you really going to look at them on their merits, or have you already made your mind up about what kind of building you want? Most traditionalist architects know there's no point going in for competitions if they're going to be judged by other architects. Then the whole thing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are planning guidelines for local councils which specifically say pastiche will not be favoured over good modern design. Shouldn't modernity be preferred precisely because it's innovative and forward-thinking? You've got to look to the root of the issue, really. I wouldn't say you shouldn't have neoclassical buildings, or that children shouldn't learn Latin or Greek in schools. By definition, every building which is built today has to be a contemporary building. What I'm more interested in is the consistency of thought which goes through that process. For instance, if you have the Roman writer, architect and engineer Vitruvius back here now, his core values of commodity, firmness and delight are still absolutely essential to everything we do. Yet, would he expect you to be working in blocks of stone and pediments? Well, no, I don't think so. People are benefiting from cars, aeroplanes, and other modern technology, and so to take the appearance and facades of your architecture as one separate element, which should make a very clear and literal quotation back to history, seems to be inconsistent, and I think people struggle with that. I think only architects struggle with that. Most people don't have a problem with a Ferrari in the drive and a Georgian house behind it. Let's agree, vast parts of our cities are covered in very bland modern buildings with too much glass and steel. People like interesting materials, Vitruvian values, things based on human scale and a sense of place. I don't think modernism does away with any of those things. The way the traditionalist groups talk about modernism is as though it's a form that is a derivation of the international style. But I would argue the more progressive modernism does take on board context, scale and materials, and includes those in a modern way. I don't think you have any choice but to accept your contemporary status. My challenge to you is, why don't you embrace those challenges, but without explicit quotation from the past? In a way, that's the key point, the direct quotation from the past. Modernism quotes from its own past, and in the end, it is a tradition as well. In terms of an architectural language, surely with everything that is at our fingertips today, we have such a huge amount of materials to choose from, and computers to help us. Why do we not take the materials and opportunities we have and build a sensitive and responsive modernism out of that? Take the modernism out of that, and I agree with you. I think evolving is fine, but I don't think saying, I have something new at my disposal and therefore I should use it regardless, is right. So how do you prevent your buildings from being only skin deep? If they are built with steel or concrete frames and use the technology we have available, how do you stop your familiar looking classical architecture from being just a skin on the outside of the building? For many people, and for me, that is deeply unsatisfactory. I think this disappointment only comes from architects and others who have this structural, rationalist view of it. If people want to feel comfortable in their environment and need some reference to the past to do that, then I don't have a problem with it. I remember speaking to a woman about the appearance of half-timbering. She said she knew it wasn't the real thing, but for her it was a souvenir of something she liked. That is important, and I've never forgotten it. There are some buildings where there will be common ground, for example the works of Brunel or the Crystal Palace. I'm sure you would see classical references, and I would see great engineering, incredible innovation, and three-dimensional satisfaction. I just think architecture is a complete three-dimensional experience, and you should go beyond your souvenirs on the facade and look at the entire depth of experience. I do agree with that, actually. The thing I disagree with most is that you become frozen out, because people don't believe it is possible for a traditionalist to adapt. I believe there are examples which show that this is not the case. Anyone would recognize the problems with modernism and see values in traditionalism which they like. But the problem is, traditionalism is fixed and isn't something that people think is moving forward. The direct quotation is the problem I have with it. People can point out the failings of modern architecture, but the answer is not to go back in time, pick a moment and transport it to the here and now.